Good evening. I think we're ready to get started. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kessina Lee, Regional Director for Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, Region 5, our Southwest Washington region. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is a digital open house intended to let the public learn about what's going on in the region and ask agency leadership about questions you may have. I'm going to just kick off with a little background about the region, just a little bit of bragging. Our region includes fish, wildlife, habitat, enforcement, and administrative activities in 6 counties. Those are Wahkiakum, Cowlitz, Lewis, Clark, Skamania, and Klickitat. And our headquarters office is located in Ridgefield, where in normal times, we are happy to meet many of you in person. When you come in to purchase licenses or get pelts sealed or just ask questions of our amazing customer service team. So we all miss seeing you folks in person. Our staff in the region, amazing dedicated staff, operate 15 hatcheries. We have 4 wildlife areas. We have over 70 fishing access sites. A great diversity of species and habitats from the Simcoes to the Lower Columbia to Mount St. Helens and Mount Adams. We have incredible opportunities for hunting and fishing and wildlife viewing and recreating. And our region has also some of the fastest growing cities in the state, which brings challenges with population density increasing, more pressure on these wild places, but also a lot of opportunities to share the importance of protecting these places with more people. And if there's one thing that we all think of when we think of this region, it's Columbia River salmon. Recovering these stocks is really at the heart of so much passion and effort and worry. But one component of that effort is addressing predatory sea lions in the Columbia. This is really an ongoing challenge. And so we're going to give an update, really kind of some history of how we got to where we are, and then an update of where we are and what our actions are at this time, and try to answer any questions you might have about sea lion management or other topics. And before we get into the presentation on sea lions, I want to introduce the folks that I have virtually with me tonight. We have our director, Kelly Susewind. We have Regional Wildlife Program Manager, Sandra Yonker, Regional Fish Program Manager, Bryce Glasser, and our new Columbia River Management Unit Lead, Charlene Hurst, who's just been with us since September. And we also, from our partners at the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, we have Doug Hatch, who's the Deputy Manager of the Fisheries Science Department. And Doug, would you like to describe for those who might not know what CRITFC is and a little about your work?
You bet. Thanks, Christina, for inviting me to participate in this. It's great to work with our partners. So I am Doug Hatch. I'm a senior scientist with Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, and I've been there for 30 years. I'm a fishery scientist by training, but work on sea lion. I've worked on the sea lion issue since about 2005. In that, I've got a number of roles, including leading our research project, and I've been on all of the Pinniped fishery interaction task force that have come up for Bonneville as well as Willamette Falls. The Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission employs about 120 people based in Portland, Oregon. We also have an enforcement office in Hood River, and the officers there patrol the Zone 6 area from Bonneville Dam to McNary Dam. And we also have some research scientists stationed at the University of Idaho, one physiologist in Moscow, and then 16 folks stationed at the Hegerman Research Station with our genetics lab. The commission provides science and policy support to the 4 lower river treaty tribes, which are the Yakama Nation, the Nez Perce, Umatilla tribe, and Warm Springs tribes. These tribes have reserved treaty rights to hunt and fish in all usual and accustomed areas, and they also have co-management authority on the Columbia River. And that's, I think that's all I have for an introduction.
Thank you. I didn't mean to leave you hanging. I was slow on my mute.
All right.
Thanks for that, Doug. And now, Director, do you want to give some opening remarks before we dive into talking about sea lions?
Sure, Kessina, thank you very much. I'll keep it short so we can spend our time on the important topics. First, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I know these are incredibly difficult and pressing times for everybody, so super happy that you were able to spend some time with us either tonight or viewing this as a recording. So first and foremost, thank you for that. This is our second round of digital open houses in regions. The first round was a little more generic. On the second round, we're trying to pick a topic of particular interest in each region. That's the sea lion interest tonight. Within those topics in each region, we're also focusing on partnerships. We cannot get our work done without partners. In this case, a couple of adjoining states, a number of affected tribes helped us get literally an act of Congress that make it able to do this work. So tremendous effort there. They've also now are participating with us as we submitted applications to actually begin doing the physical work. So again, emphasizing the value and need for partnerships in the region and for the agency as a whole. I want to emphasize this as an element of the overall approach to, as Kessina said, the importance of salmon steelhead on the Columbia River. We're certainly paying attention to hydro, hatchery, habitat, and harvest, all the other H's. But we put a lot of energy, a lot of resources into that. We need to make sure when those fish are coming back, those precious adults that come back, that they're not being unduly impacted by predators. And so that's really the focus tonight on the Pinniped sea lion piece. It's a priority for us agency-wide, not just in Region 5. We've got a big budget request into the legislature this year, hopefully to be funded. An element of that will be helping with this work here on the Columbia River for sea lion removal. Also has some scientific work. We've got some similar issues in Puget Sound with different pinnipeds, and so we're putting in some requests for that as well so that we can provide the scientific baseline to actually get more towards the management techniques we're going to talk about a little bit tonight. And lastly, there's a little bit on that on killer whales. We don't have a lot of those in the Columbia, so I'll skip that for now. So again, thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Look forward to the conversation, and we'll make sure we have some time for questions at the end. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Kessina.
Great. Thank you, Director. All right, I'm going to start to share my screen. So can I get a thumbs up that my screen is visible?
Looks good.
You've got my slideshow? Okay, I'm gonna make sure you know how to advance it. Okay, so that should have advanced. All right. So here's just a little outline of what we're going to cover. We're going to talk a little about the sea lions that we have here in the region, a little about the Marine Mammal Protection Act, some of the history of sea lion predation in the region, some non-lethal deterrents that we've tried in the past, and then the update on the approval of our application with other states and co-managers for our current authorization for sea lion removal program in the Columbia. Not advancing. Sorry. Okay. So we have two types of sea lions in the region, California sea lions on the left and the larger lighter colored stellar sea lions on the right. California sea lions we have here are adult and subadult males that migrate north from the breeding grounds on the Channel Islands in California. They're primarily here from September to May when they return south for the summer breeding season. Then following breeding, the males migrate north while the pups and females stay near the rookeries in California. This way they avoid competing for prey. So when the Marine Mammal Protection Act was passed in 1972, the California sea lion population was less than 75,000. Since the act, they have steadily recovered, reaching a sustainable population level in the 1990s. That's that red line that you see on the graph here. And their numbers have continued to grow at over 5% per year. And they've been hovering at or above carrying capacity for about 10 years now. So that's that the blue line there that you see. Stellar sea lions are primarily present in Washington waters between September and April, though in recent years they've been observed at Bonneville for 10 or 11 months of the year. There's an eastern and western population segment. The ones we have are the eastern segment, and they were listed as threatened until 2013, but they are now considered recovered and were delisted. So we estimate we have about 2,500 stellars in Washington and about 9,600 in Oregon. And here you see the demarcation between the two populations. So that western stock is still ESA listed, but our eastern stock here along the west coast of the US and Canada is not. So a little background on the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which is the federal regulatory framework we as the state are subject to if we want to do anything related to marine mammals. So the goals of the Marine Mammal Protection Act were to maintain species and stocks at their optimum sustainable populations, to restore depleted stocks to OSP, and to reduce bycatch and injury of marine mammals that was occurring in commercial fisheries, which was a significant source of mortality, to levels approaching zero. The MMPA also imposed a moratorium on take of marine mammals, and that's defined as harass, hunt, capture, or kill. So this basically reflects language in the Endangered Species Act. However, under Section 120 of the Act, there is a provision for intentional lethal take of individually identifiable pinnipeds that are having a significant negative impact on salmonids. So baked into the MMPA was a provision to address predation, but it required the pinnipeds to be individually identifiable. So another term to know is potential biological removal, or PBR. So PBR is basically the maximum number of animals that can be removed from a stock that won't affect that stock maintaining its optimum sustainable population. And it's calculated, they take a minimum population estimate and multiply it by half the productivity rate and then apply a recovery factor. And I'm not going to go into the math any more than that, but there is a calculation for determining how many animals can be removed without creating unintended consequences for the stock that you're removing. So NOAA Fisheries, as part of their periodic stock assessment reports, provides population estimates, and where a population could sustain some number of removals, they provide that PBR figure. And so you can see for harbor seals in Puget Sound and on our outer coast, there is not a number, a PBR identified, but for the California sea lions and stellar sea lions, there is a potential biological removal that's been identified by NOAA. So now that you know a little about the two sea lion species and the MMPA, let's talk about the specific problem here in the Columbia. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this site, East Mooring Basin in Astoria, that has been pretty well taken over as a haul out, primarily by California sea lions, and those numbers have increased over time. Here's another shot. They're very gregarious. They'll pile on each other like cordwood. They don't mind as long as there's good foraging nearby. And this is kind of ground zero for the problem. In this case, it's Bonneville Dam, the first impoundment on the main stem Columbia. But any of these impoundments where fish bottleneck and have to stage up create opportunities for sea lions to get in there and have a field day preying on those fish. Sea lions are smart. They follow the food. And in the Columbia, if you follow the fish to river mile 145, the fish that might give you a run for your money in the ocean are suddenly stuck and much easier to prey upon. So here you can see the increase in the numbers of California sea lions at East Mooring Basin over about 20 years. You can see in 2005 and 6, the maximum number was about 250, whereas 10 years later, that maximum was almost 4,000. And that's East Mooring Basin, but the same is true at Bonneville Dam. In the 1980s, there were 1 or 2 California sea lions observed. In 2001, you had reports of up to 6 at one time. And then by 2002, the Army Corps of Engineers estimated 30 California sea lions foraging at the dam for salmon between January and May. So recruitment of California sea lions at both Bonneville and at Willamette Falls in Oregon has really been increasing over the last 15 to 20 years. And more recently, we've also seen animals expanding into the tributaries as well. We think it's likely animals from the dam and the falls that are making these foraging trips into the tribs rather than completely separate additional animals. But because those tribs contain spawning habitat of listed salmon or steelhead stocks, this is something that we're paying close attention to. And you can see the observations in the various tribs in this table. So that's California sea lions. The presence of stellar sea lions at Bonneville Dam has increased as well, from a minimum of 3 animals in 2003 when they were first documented to a minimum of 89 in 2011. And in 2018, a maximum of 66 stellars were observed at Bonneville during a single day. Excuse me. So in fact, stellar sea lions are now present for more months of the year and are consuming higher proportions of the runs than are California sea lions. The increasing abundance for both species has really followed a similar pattern. You have a small number of animals that habituate to a location, and then recruitment of other animals occurs. Remember the photo of them at East Mooring Basin. These are social animals. So where you have 1 or 2, more tend to arrive. Habituated animals generally arrive earlier and remain at sites longer, and they seem to habituate easily and return to the site year after year. Substantial efforts have been made over the years to non-lethally deter pinnipeds, to get them to move away from these pinch points where the salmon are staged up to give the fish a chance to move through the dam. These images are from Ballard Locks back in the late 1980s, I believe. Both dam-based and boat-based hazing methods have been used. Here you can see parameters that were followed for boat-based hazing at Bonneville. Doug can speak more directly to this. So when we're done, I might kick it over to you, Doug, to give a little more detail on hazing, and certainly can answer those questions. But he's been part of those operations. And as you can see, there are safety guidelines, including for fish. So when you have 1,000 fish per day passing over the dam, you can't use seal bombs in the tail race due to potential harm to the fish. And there's a lot of data collected about how and when hazing was used, what the sea lions were doing before and after the hazing events in order to document the effectiveness. And here you see some images of the hazing. It's a large area to be trying to haze. The river is about 1/2 mile wide here, so difficult to be effective. So in summary, none of the hazing methods are long-term effective, with the exception of putting in physical barriers to keep the animals out of the fish ladders. So the sleds, which are sea lion excluder devices, things like that. Everything else creates a temporary effect at best, but the food reward is just too strong, and the animals return to foraging soon after hazing stops. And so just to summarize what we've learned about hazing over the years, stellar sea lions became habituated at Bonneville during periods of intense hazing. California sea lions were being hazed, and stellar sea lions essentially moved into the area while that was occurring. Hazing has a short-term effect only, but we are very open to new developments in non-lethal deterrence that might have applications, either in a larger area like Bonneville or in the tributaries. The goal of doing removals without having a hazing requirement first is that we do think that being proactive will prevent that social recruitment that we see, meaning over time we would expect to need fewer removals because we have fewer animals recruiting and becoming habituated to these sites. And tributaries bring some challenges with hazing because they are smaller areas, so that could be less safe for both fish and the public, so there could be a public safety component. But again, we are open to new developments in non-lethal deterrence. And now we're going to finish up with a brief history of the removal program in the Columbia. We talked about the history of the problem and attempts at non-lethal deterrence, which hopefully helps you understand the process we went through to get to seeking that lethal removal authority. So in the early 2000s, predation at Bonneville was evaluated and hazing measures were tested. And then in 2006, the states requested authorization to lethally remove California sea lions at Bonneville. The ensuing years saw that authorization granted. There was litigation, there were appeals, there was a reapplication and reauthorization, and removals were occurring during those years. And then in 2018, NOAA authorized Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife to lethally remove sea lions at Willamette Falls. So prior to 2020, our removal authority contained these conditions. So each California sea lion had to be individually identifiable, which meant the animal had to be trapped and marked and then released. And then individual sea lions had to be observed at Bonneville Dam for 5 days and observed eating a salmon at Bonneville Dam. And they had to be subjected to hazing while at Bonneville Dam. And you have to be able to do all those things while being able to see the full identifying brand of that animal. So once that happened, once an individual sea lion met those criteria, then that data and a request to include the animal on the removal list was made to NOAA Fisheries. NOAA Fisheries would review the data and decide if that animal should be included on the removal list. And then once the animal's on the removal list, it had to be retrapped, and only then could it be removed from the system. So quite a few steps to go through, but under those conditions, these are the numbers of California sea lions that were removed through 2019. So a total of 215 over that 11-year period. And then in December 2018, Congress passed an amendment to the MMPA. So as was said earlier, it literally took an act of Congress. But this was specific to pinnipeds in the Columbia River preying on endangered salmon. And the eligible entities, which included the 3 states and a consortium of tribal co-managers, submitted an application under this amended Marine Mammal Protection Act in June of 2019. And in August of this year, NOAA Fisheries authorized the permit. So the amended act provides for place-based safe zones for salmon. It includes protection for sturgeon and lamprey, which were not included before. It allows us to take proactive action based on the presence of sea lions in these safe zones, and it includes tribal co-management, which is a vital partnership we need for this work. So a task force was convened in May, and recommendations were made to NOAA Fisheries for provisions to include in the permit. So the permit conditions under this amended MMPA includes both California and stellar sea lions with a limit of no more than 540 California sea lions and 176 stellar sea lions over the 5-year period of the permit. The The scope of the application, the geographic scope, is the main stem Columbia River from River Mile 112, so the I-205 bridge in Portland to McNary Dam, and then any tributary of the Columbia River that includes spawning habitat of listed salmon or steelhead. And sea lions in those areas, due to the 20 years of data that and observations that have been collected, are deemed to be having a significant negative impact on listed salmon and steelhead and are subject to removal. And the other condition is that there be an approved plan for humane capture and removal methods. And that's overseen by veterinarians and reevaluated annually. And as part of describing the problem, we essentially had to categorize where the problem is really the worst, where the hot spots are. And as you can see, we plan to really prioritize Bonneville, and ODFW will prioritize Willamette Falls initially. We think addressing those source populations in those spots that you see in red here will really make a difference in the tribs as well. And so then you can see those orange areas that represent the category 2 priority, where we have low to moderate numbers of sea lions that are present maybe occasionally or periodically, but we wouldn't want to let those animals get habituated. So we'd want to be proactive in those areas. So what's the expected benefit of this authorization? To reduce predation is really the goal on salmon, steelhead, as well as sturgeons, and by stellar sea lions, which we haven't had any removal authority with before. And as I said, they're having more of an impact now. The removal program will be more efficient because we won't have to repeatedly handle these animals. So more efficient in terms of our efforts being more efficient, and also we think more efficient in preventing these animals from recruiting and habituating, which also, if you have fewer animals recruiting over time, there should be a need for fewer removals. One of the things we'll be looking at is how do we quantify that this is having a benefit? So since we know sea lions at these pinch points prey on a certain number of fish, we can calculate from that if they are not there, then there's a lack of X amount of predation. So that work is happening, has been done at Willamette Falls. So for example, ODFW removed 33 California sea lions in 2019. There was a winter steelhead run that was about to blink out. They had only 512 fish return in 2017. By removing those 33 California sea lions, there were then no California sea lions at the falls from August of 2019 to March of 2020 for the first time in a decade. And predation dropped from 21 to 25% of that run to 7% and then to 1 to 2%. So a very dramatic estimate. And this is actually a typo on this second to last bullet. In 2020, this translates to should be a 1,377 steelhead saved out of a total run of 5,500. So really a substantial impact by being able to just get in there and remove those animals and dropping the percentage of predation. And subsequently, that extinction probability went down from 89% to 11% in 2019 and is expected to drop even lower in 2020. So as the director said earlier, we know there are a lot of factors that affect salmon and steelhead marine survival. There's estuary and food in the near shore. There are contaminants and parasites, the impacts of climate change on ocean condition, and predation. And then in the Columbia Basin, we have the 4 H's, habitat, hydropower, hatcheries, and harvest. We continue our efforts in all of those areas, but predation is an important component of that. And we're really looking forward to making a positive impact for these fish. by addressing predation in a meaningful and efficient way. And with that, I am done presenting, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. As I figure out how to stop sharing my screen, I don't know, Doug, did you want to add anything about hazing since you were really involved in that over the years?
Sure, Kessina. That's a great overview of the situation. Well, I had just a couple of components from the tribes. So Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission has been since 2005 doing this non-lethal hazing below Bonneville Dam. We've also been estimating sea lion abundance between Bonneville Dam and Astoria on a weekly basis. And we've also been estimating predation throughout the river. The tribes, and then with this amendment to the Marine Mammal Protection Act, the 120F, that allows the tribes to participate in the lethal removal, we are moving our efforts toward the lethal removal. We think that is where the best management lies at the moment. And the tribes do know that sea lions are just one piece of a bigger puzzle to restore salmon and steelhead. Tribes have spent millions of dollars on habitat improvements throughout their areas. They've worked very diligently in hydro system improvements, including the flex spill that's going on now. Harvest management, the Columbia River is highly managed for both tribal and non-tribal harvest. And the tribes have also spent millions of dollars on hatchery operations, improvements, including innovative approaches such as supplementation with wild broodstock and kelp steelhead reconditioning. But we do feel like there's a balance that needs to be put in place. We want to continue to work on all these other components, but the predation that's been occurring by sea lions on these adult stage fish is something that really needs to be curtailed.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Really appreciate that, the additional information. And I don't know, Kelly, if you have anything to add or in response, I guess really quickly in summary, I know we are operating right now at the dam. We have folks out there and have done our first fall stellar removals. Everything is challenging right now with COVID, and then wildfire smoke affected us for a while. So it's been a hard year to kind of get this program up and running, and having to think about staff safety as we're learning to deal with larger animals in the stellars. But the team and the partners are out there staying safe and ramping up this work. So just want to give a shout out to the great team we have out there who are super safety conscious and approach this work with just the utmost professionalism and under difficult circumstances, more difficult than usual this year.
Thanks, Kessina. I think you did a great job covering everything. I was going to just highlight that you are getting started. The work started this fall, so you've covered that now as well. It's a long path. Took a long time to get here. It's a careful, methodical path. We don't jump to lethal removal quickly, and but really, as a last resort, this is what's necessary to save some of these precious runs. So it's a great effort. Compliments to all of our partners. Compliments to our staff. And I think we've got some questions starting to flow in, so I would suggest we move on to that.
Great. Well, here's one that I don't know the answer to. We'll see if any of our panelists, this is a tricky one. Honestly, maybe Doug knows, how much salmon can a single sea lion consume in one day? This is one of those things that's a piece of information that I feel like has gone past me and I haven't retained it. Nice foundational knowledge. I would slyly Google, but I feel like you guys would be able to tell. I don't know, Doug, you're muted.
There we go. From a modeling perspective, it's 2 to 5 salmon. They've looked at it bioenergetically, but as people know, with predators, and you see it with bears as well, that they will catch, when the salmon are really abundant, they'll catch a fish and kind of high grade. They'll take some will just eat the skin or the top of the head or something and move to the next salmon. So in those situations when the salmon are really abundant up there, individuals can eat a lot more. And the observations by the Corps of Engineer researchers, they have a couple of individuals that they have seen them from the base of the dam, and they see about a quarter of a mile out. They've documented individual sea lions eating around 200 fish. That's not in a day, but in the 2 to 3 months that they're at the dam, they've seen them eating that many fish. So it's a very high number that are taken.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So I want to remind folks that you can submit questions at any time. You should be able to type them into the Q&A feature, I believe. So feel free to submit those questions. So here's another one. Let's see. Is WDFW only removing sea lions to preserve salmon for harvest for sport and commercial anglers? Well, I will add to it. I mean, the short answer is no. We have, I think, I read, 32 wild salmon populations that are bound for them by sea lions at Bonneville Dam. So, all of these salmon that are, bound for the upper rivers and the tributaries, they have to pass through the estuary, and then, a tremendous number of them have to pass over Bonneville Dam. So, we're very concerned about wild upper Columbia River, spring Chinook in particular. There's the Snake River, spring and summer Chinook. So this is really about recovering wild stocks. It's this isn't just for anglers. This is for those wild fish to give them a chance. So I don't know if anyone, Director or Doug, if you'd want to add to that.
Well, from the administration side, this is absolutely not about just harvest. Certainly, if we are successful in preserving these runs and enhancing these runs, there will be more fish available for harvest. So it's an ancillary benefit. But this is really about the health of the runs themselves. And we in some of these runs, high percentages, I've seen 20 to 40% estimates for some particular runs being taken out in a year of adult fish. All the work we do to get smolts out, adults back, the adults coming back, it's really critical to the survival of some of these runs. And that's our first and foremost objective here. And yes, it will, if we're successful on this and all the other 4-H's and all the other issues we do, hopefully there'll be a lot more fish available for everybody to catch as well.
Oh, Doug, you're muted.
Twice, sorry. Those are great answers. And I just quickly jump in with one other thing is that the removal near Bonneville is that these are pinch points where there's 16 entrances to the fish ladder at Bonneville. So it really concentrates fish trying to find those entrances. And it really, it sways the pendulum of success for sea lions way in their favor. It's a really easy place for them to hunt. And what we want to do is move them away from that area, make it a fair chase, and make them have to work for their salmon and not just shooting fish in a barrel.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Here's a question. How often do you expect to be out conducting sea lion operations, and when do you do it? I think either Doug or I could probably take this one. So one of the things that is happening is we're starting fall operations where we haven't done those in the past. So as I said, this is doing fall operations on stellar sea lions is new for us. So we expect to be out probably going forward in the fall, September, until when the days just get too short. There's just not really enough light and the weather conditions are hazardous and there aren't animals around. So we'll be out probably, well into November typically. And then we typically start up in the spring, and I might look to Doug for exactly when we typically start in the spring. But then we usually go until late May or into May when most of the animals have left the area. So essentially we'll be there when there are animals out there. And let's see, how often do you expect to be out? So it's several days a week. Again, it's based on when there are animals present. So it will correlate with when there are fish present, because that's when you tend to see animals present. But Doug, do you want to fill that in?
Sure, that May period or that spring period usually starts occurring in early April, which is just dependent on when the animals are really showing up in large enough numbers to trap. And then they start leaving by mid-May, and by the end of May, pretty much all of the animals have left and gone to the breeding grounds. And so they will be really out of the river for the next 2 months after that. So we'll go till May.
So here's a comment. Thank you for the information. What factors went into deciding the threshold of 5 days of presence at the dam? So that was in our prior authorization. We don't have to meet that standard now. And I don't know, Doug, if you know what the rationale was for that on the original permit.
But this was on the 5-day threshold, was that?
Yeah, the five,
Yeah, so that was just part of the terms and conditions that NOAA had determined was necessary. So the idea is to remove an animal, they have to be individually identifiable and having a significant negative impact on ESA listed fish. And they felt that 5-day period meant that they were having that significant negative impact. And say a sea lion that only was there for a day may have just been exploring and came back and was somehow naive. Research has really shown that there are no naive sea lions that make it the 145 miles upstream to Bonneville. They're all eating salmon, and they're just finding a very easy hunting place at Bonneville. So that is why the criteria was there, and it isn't there anymore.
Yeah, thank you for that. Here's one that I think this looks like a Sandra question. So Sandra, with the ever increasing need for wildlife habitat and landscape connectivity for local flora and fauna to adapt to a changing climate, how will WDFW prioritize increasing habitat connectivity across key wildlife corridors that move across I-5 in Southwest Washington?
Thanks, Kessina. Good question, a challenging question for sure, especially as Kessina mentioned at the beginning of the webinar today, that we are in an area that has such a high and fast increasing human population, so a lot of sprawl and building going on. So we definitely work with a lot of partners to, for example, the county or land trusts, to try to prioritize that. For example, when we were working on the Columbia white-tailed deer work, we worked with Department of Transportation, who was doing some analysis with regard to corridors, so that as we were trying to prioritize habitat for Columbia white-tailed deer, we were using those data to help guide us in where we should try to either acquire or do different types of habitat manipulations or enhancements or anything like that. So it's definitely a key concern to all of us is islands aren't going to work, and we can work hard on protecting fish and wildlife, but if they don't have habitat, that's obviously going to be a problem. So it's a constant thing that we work on. And like I said, with partners as well as WDFW itself, we also work on trying to acquire properties to help in that arena. But it's definitely only happening through partnerships, and I, of course, don't want to forget saying private landowners, because private landowners do such a good job of providing habitat for fish and wildlife. And it's through these partnerships that we can provide those corridors. We definitely use different kinds of analyses to guide those decisions. Like I said, Department of Transportation, Department of Ecology, Department of Fish and Wildlife. We work with all different partners to help guide those kinds of decisions. And it can be anything from acquisition to enhancements to different kinds of access or user management in terms of conflict between users to enhance different kinds of habitats, et cetera. So great question, and definitely something that is a priority to all of us as we manage fish and wildlife.
Thank you. A question for Doug. How successful has the steelhead Kelt rehabilitation program been, and is it worth expanding? And Doug, I'm going to ask you to please explain what that is as part of your answer.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for the question. That's been my life for a long time, has been doing Kelt steelhead reconditioning. So steelhead don't die after they spawn. They move downstream, and what they try to do is go back out to the ocean where they can recondition, remature, and then come back upstream on a second run and do this multiple spawning, which is called iteroparity. What our Kelt reconditioning programs have been are basically a really light touch hatchery action. We've been doing it in Yakama River for over 20 years now. And this year, so what we do is we collect those kelts as they move downstream. In the Yakama, it's only wild fish. So we collect these fish at Prosser Hatchery there's a screen there that screens off the canal water and takes them through basically a bypass, sort of a small collection bypass facility. We collect the kelts, we put them in big 20-foot tanks at the Prosser Hatchery, and then we feed them pretty specialized diets to get them to gain weight, become in good condition again, and then remature. And then we use blood assays to come up to determine who's been remature or not. And for this year, just last week, we released 268 reconditioned, remature wild steelhead back into the Yakama River from the program. So those are fish that are going to spawn this spring amongst the wild fish. So there is no hatchery spawning. They're wild fish when they came in the hatchery. They're wild fish when they come out and they go and spawn. We've been evaluating the reproductive success of those fish, and it's been what you would expect. So a fish that spawns 2 times, multiple times, has twice the reproductive potential as a fish that only spawns once. So we see it as a very useful, successful program for bringing back wild steelhead runs. And we have been doing this in the Snake River as well for about the last 15 years. And we will release next week about 80 B-run steelhead below Lower Granite that are all wild B-run fish. And over the last couple of years, we've had as much as 6% of the B-run spawning population were reconditioned at Dvorak Hatchery with our program. Again, only wild fish that we're bringing in. I think it's a useful program, particularly for the really imperiled wild steelhead stock. So thanks for the question.
Thank you for that. That was a great question. I'm really glad that someone asked that. Cormorants nesting on the Astoria Bridge. Any plans to remove these predators? I'm gonna ask Sandra to join me with this one. This is an issue that I know we've been tracking for many years. It has fallen to date primarily under the federal bailiwick. So we have not been directly engaged, but definitely very aware and certainly have concerns about avian predation. I think we're looking to engage, kind of lean more forward on avian predation, and there's some coordination going on with Oregon to do that, to take it on a little more directly than we have in the past. So, because it is such an important piece of the predation puzzle, just like not including predation and only focusing on the 4 H's is incomplete, only focusing on pinniped predation and not focusing on avian and predatory fish predation is also not getting the complete picture. But Sandra, I don't know if you want to fill that in with a little more detail on the history and kind of where we are right now.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Kessina. The cormorants on the bridge, on the Astoria Bridge, definitely have always been there, but not in the numbers that we see now. And so that's been a more recent shift as they have been hazed and moved off of East Sand Island, which is on the Oregon side of the Columbia River. So as they have been hazed, and there's been so much work to do that, and it's one of the largest colonies on the east side, on the west side. I just went to the East Coast for a minute there. But that is, I think the key thing that you said, Kessina, is that given that they are a migratory bird, brings in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, given that the actions for the hazing and removal are through the Army Corps of Engineers, and then Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, it's really been a long-term effort. I know that our agency is looking into, like you said, putting more effort into sort of a cross-programmatic approach to this, given that we have pinniped predation and avian predation, but it's really a partnership. This is not something that we can or would want to take on our own. It's really about working together. And so the past work is all being really driven by the Corps because of East Sand Island. Now that they're on the bridge, and other places as well. This question was specifically to the bridge, but they've gone to other places in Oregon as well as Washington. And how do we respond as a state to that, given the impacts that they can have, because you're kind of moving the problem from one place to another. So definitely is on the radar to be working on, but it is a partnership.
Yeah. Next question, what happens to the sea lion carcasses? Can they be used at all, or are they full of toxins from the lethal removal process? So there is a provision in the permit that if the tribes have a use, would like to take the carcasses for traditional uses, I believe, and Doug, maybe you can help me out, that they can make that request to NIMS. Is that accurate? I believe that's how it's framed in the permit. And then NIMS essentially would say, yes, go ahead. And we haven't had that to date, if I'm not mistaken.
It's actually in the permit that the tribes that are participating in this can use the carcasses for educational or cultural use. Where we're also, and you're also right about toxins, besides the euthanizing chemicals, there are heavy metals and other toxins that are in these large adult sea lions. And so we're working with Oregon State University to look at the toxicity levels of various components. So we want to make sure that before we do this cultural use, that we've got the human health concerns checked off. And so we're working on that now, but we do have tribes that are very interested in some of the carcasses for regalia and other cultural uses. And so that is a really nice component of this new permit, is that the carcasses can be used in more culturally significant ways. And the other thing that should be added is, before they become carcasses, that the first avenue here is to find if there's any suitable facility, aquariums or zoos or something, that want the animals and have the suitable means to take care of them. That's done first, and they can relocate those animals. And it did happen in the very first year of removals. About 6 animals were transferred to SeaWorld and to a couple of other aquariums. But there hasn't been any interest in them since then. And unfortunately, for the sea lions perspective, these are large adult males, and zoos and sea lions, or zoos generally, are not very interested in maintaining those guys around.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. So here's a question. Aren't gill nets part of the problem with endangered runs on the Columbia? Why can't we just leave the sea lions alone? Won't nature just balance out over time? So I'm going to take the second part first. Won't nature just balance out over time? So my answer on that is essentially, this is a really altered system with those impoundments that we talked about. And that's really, we think, such a huge part of the problem, is that, you have, and we saw this in Ballard Locks as well, that wherever you have these artificial impoundments where the fish have to stop and stage up, that creates that vulnerability. So nature can't necessarily just balance out without some help in these highly altered systems. So I think that's why, there's an obligation to try and help that balance kind of, recalibrate. And that's what we're trying to do. So I would offer that. Aren't gill nets part of the problem with endangered runs on the Columbia? I mean, I would say historically, harvest is a component. I would say now, the Columbia River is one of the most intensively managed fisheries in the world. So, and we are, as I'm sure anybody who's interested enough in our work to have tuned into this webinar knows that working on improving fisheries management on the Columbia is always a priority for us. We are always, we have incredible people working in our Columbia River Management Unit working on this issue, and we're always trying to improve it and diversify the gear types and right size the fisheries. So all of that is definitely happening. It's, harvest is definitely a huge component of those 4-H's. So I would say that. I don't know, Director, if you want to add anything.
I think you covered it well, Kessina. So we, as you mentioned, this is one of the most intensively managed fisheries in the world. And as part of that intensive management system, we're held to Endangered Species Act criteria, conservation criteria. We have to meet those criteria regardless for harvest, regardless of the type of harvest, whether it's commercial, recreational, gill nets, other gear, hook and line gear. So our entire management of that Columbia Basin is based, or harvest management is based on meeting those conservation objectives, ESA objectives. And so we do not put, I know this is one of the most controversial issues we'll talk about, but we do not put gill net fisheries in that we feel are harmful to the ESA runs. That's counter to our core mission and responsibilities. And we're confident that that's not the case. That said, it remains a controversial issue for folks. So I would say no, they do not impact endangered species runs. I shouldn't say impact, inappropriately impact. We are managing those impacts just like we manage all impacts from all harvests.
Thank you. So we're at 7 o'clock. We have a couple more questions in the queue. So let's get through these. So I think this is maybe a Bryce question. So Bryce, the question is, what about hatchery production? Are all hatcheries producing as much as they can? And if not, why not?
Okay, thanks. That's a good question. Focusing on Region 5, Southwest Washington hatchery facilities, the majority of our hatcheries are at or near capacity right now. We do have a few hatcheries that probably have a little bit more space. The reason that they're not producing as much as they potentially could is mostly related to our ESA constraints under our permits that allow us to operate those hatcheries. We have seen a few programs that have been reduced from what they were historically, and haven't filled that space with other production. So in a few places we do have a little bit more room, but the majority of our facilities are at or near capacity. Yes.
Great. Okay, Sandra, got another one for you. What's the latest information on elk hoof disease in Southwest Washington and the rest of the state? And has there been any improvement in the problem in recent years?
Thanks, Kessina. So the latest information, we wrapped up a survival study, and researchers are working on analyzing those data and to get those out to folks. With regard to there's sort of two sides, or two prongs, I should say, not sides, two prongs to this approach. One is the partnership with Washington State University, and they have set aside dedicated staff and funds to look more into the disease, as it was identified as treponeme-associated hoof disease, and looking into what other sort of environments need to be apparent or present for this disease to continue the way it is and moving so rapidly. So they're working on that. They've actually built a captive facility, and we have been working with them to provide them with elk so that the research can continue with regard to transmission of disease. How is it transmitted? What other bacteria are involved in this sort of soup or complex, for lack of a better word, that causes this? And we've also, many folks might have seen through our 3-year harvest recommendation process, there's a proposal to incentivize hunters to harvest animals with hoof disease. And so, for example, that is something that as we're looking at the management side, in tandem with the research side, what can we do to try to address this devastating problem? And that has just gone through public review. And so we're looking at what the comments are from the public and working out how to flesh out that proposal. It'll also go back out to public review again. So there'll be another opportunity for eyes on that and input and any comments with regard to that. So it's kind of a multiple prong approach, trying to come up with management approaches. It's very hard to manage a disease like this that is this prevalent and easy to convey to other animals when they're in a wild situation. So there are no quick cures, there's no vaccine, you can't quarantine them, you can't treat their feet and all those kinds of things. So that's where the research component is, to try to understand better on how that's transmitted, and are there any ways that we can intervene or stop the vector. So for example, WSU came out and took all kinds of soil samples from Southwest Washington so that they can use that in their research, etc. Unfortunately, it is a very contagious agent, and there has been a positive in Oregon, there's been positive in Idaho. So it's devastating. We're all literally in the same boat of how do we stop this and what can we do? So there's a lot of effort on multiple sides to try to address that, as obviously we don't want to see our elk herds affected like that. As we know, the recreational opportunity that they provide, both with regard to harvest as well as viewing. So a lot of work is going into it. Have there been improvements? Not yet, in terms of has the disease being curbed or stopped or anything like that. Unfortunately, it continues to spread, and we're working, like I said, with WSU as well as multiple other partners to try to find a way to address it, both through management and research.
Thank you. So I think we are going to end on this question. This is a great one. Has the fall fish stocking in lakes, or is the fall fish stocking in lakes still going on even with COVID-19? Are you still stocking through the rest of the year? So I'm going to look to Bryce for details, but I'm going to say yes, this is a good news story. And then let Bryce provide a little more detail.
Yeah, thanks, Kessina. Yeah, we were able to resume lake stocking back in the late spring, early summer with some new protocols for staff, so we could make sure that staff were being safe and minimizing exposure risk to COVID-19. So that was great news to get things started again. Schedules, throughout the state continue to happen through the fall. Particularly here in Region 5 and on the west side, we're also kind of preparing for the Black Friday plants that are pretty popular that come up here next month around Thanksgiving to get some larger fish out and provide opportunity for folks to get out during the holiday timeframe there. So yes, we're still stocking lakes and still encouraging people to get out there and catch some fish.
Thank you. So I think we're gonna wrap up, kind of say maybe give some closing thoughts, but I do want to remind people, if you're watching this, the recorded version after this webinar is over, and you would have liked to ask a question, you can email director@dfw.wa.gov with any questions that you might have that didn't get answered. So, and we'll happily get answers for you. So with that, I just want to thank everyone who participated, thank the public who tuned into view or who are watching later. Really want to thank Doug especially for being here. Our partnerships on the Columbia River Pinniped work are just so crucial. The work with ODFW, with Idaho Fish and Game, and with CRITFC, as well as others. I mean, just the massive effort that goes into getting the data that we need, and the support that we've gotten from the Army Corps, the Power and Conservation Council, just lots of partnerships. So yeah, Doug, it's just been a pleasure to have you here. And I hope it wasn't too painful. So thanks for doing this. And I'll ask, so Doug, if you have any closing remarks, and then Director, if you want to kind of take us out. Oh, Doug, you're muted.
I'm consistent with that.
I think that means you have to buy us pizza.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for inviting me. Great questions from the audience. I think it's really great that you guys are reaching out and getting the region involved. That's great. This Pinniped issue is very complex and controversial, but I think it really is a model in cooperation, coordination, and adaptive management. And you mentioned most of those players, and I agree. It's complex at the biological level as well as the political level. including, as was mentioned, it took an act of Congress to get this going. And so anyway, we're excited to be partners in this, and we're gonna get through this, and I think improve things for the fisheries and for fish and escapement.
Yeah. Thank you. Great. All right. Director.
Thanks, Kessina. Thanks, Doug. So I think you've both hit on most of it. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Thanks to our partners. Thanks, Doug, CRITFC, for not only being here tonight, but partnership throughout these processes. We are not successful without it. I think it was a great presentation. A lot of these things are very emotionally attached, and it's really important for us to get out here and help people really understand what we're doing, why we're doing it. As Kessina said, if you had questions you wish you would have asked, or if you're not watching this live, send us an email at director@dfw.wa.gov, and we'll get you some answers. I'd also be interested in any input you have on the format of these digital open houses, additional topics you'd like to see at future digital open houses, or ways we can improve the process. And then I also really look forward to the time we can actually get out in the room with you face to face and have a real open house. But those times will have to wait for now. So thanks everybody for joining us tonight, and look forward to seeing you next time.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Good night.